Right now, I'm 18 and have been living alone for some time. I had to flee my folks. 10 years younger than me, my younger sister has always been the focus of attention. My life altered in ways I never understood from the day she was born until much later. It all began when my mother experienced a challenging pregnancy with my sister. At the time, I was just 8. Hence, I had little idea what was going on. I knew just that it was serious. My sister almost died when she was born. My mother was in and out of the hospital. My parents so clung to my sister as if she were some sort of miracle. I understand that she was born against the odds, but it felt like I was only an afterthought from that point on. I don't recall much before my sister was born, but after she arrived, everything started to center on. My parents would constantly remind me that my sister required more care given her fragility and that I should be understanding. I attempted to follow along at first, but it soon became evident that I was no longer a part of their life. Years passed. The first time I understood just how terrible things were was on my 11th birthday. I was only there to assist and take care of her, to play the part of the neglected elder brother while she was pampered like a queen. Because she was offended to see a cake she did not own, my parents let my sister blow out my birthday candles. Though my parents pushed me, I did not want to do it. She blew them out, and for me, they lit the candles, but the moment seemed utterly destroyed. The following year and the year after that saw the same thing. It became the custom. My sister would blow out my birthday candles and bring me her own gifts on my day every year. But I never got anything on hers. I tried asking my folks why this always seemed to be the case. It was such a stupid answer when they informed me I was a male and boys don't need to worry about things like that. That is the reality, though. They showed no concern for my preferences. Their concern was making sure my sister was pleased. If I wasn't thrilled with it, that was my issue. The favoritism continued beyond birthdays. Everything in our lives is centered on her. If I wanted to do anything, only if my sister wanted to do it too would be permitted. Should she not, it was off table. Eventually, I simply quit and shut myself in my room whenever I needed quiet. That room began to be my haven. My parents wouldn't care. Hence, I even shut the door as my sister would barge in anytime she wanted. My sister got a princess complex from her extreme spoiling. They wanted me to turn off the lock, but ultimately gave up and allowed me to retain it. She had a fit if things did not go her way since she expected it to. She would call to our parents if I disobeyed her instructions, acting as though I were her servant. Naturally, they sided with her every time. This caused us so many arguments. Every time, I was the one who got in trouble. By the time I was in high school, I hardly had any contact with my parents. We hardly communicated until they needed me for something, usually to monitor my sister. They handled me like a naturally occurring babysitter. Things really didn't start to strike me until I graduated from high school. Though they had no idea what they were talking about, my parents showed up and boasted to other parents about how their influence drove me to work so hard. Actually, I worked hard to get out of that place as quickly as I could. Then came my 18th birthday. They never even bothered me about my grades or gave any thought to education until there was a parent-teacher conference. At last, I had wanted to spend a day entirely for me. Really, it was my 18th birthday, a significant turning point. Naturally, however, my folks had different ideas. They simply brought us to this copy of Chuck E. Cheese-style venue my sister adored. They never asked where I wanted to go. Little children celebrating birthdays, eating pizza, and running antiquated arcade games surrounding me. When it came time for the cake, I couldn't believe what they had done. It was so typical of my parents to choose a location that was ideal for her and horrible for me. The cake had white blossoms on a pink base. Yes, it had my name, but it was obviously designed for my sister rather than for me. Naturally, they positioned the cake in front of my sister and instructed her to blow the candles while they were lighting them. Something inside of me then simply snapped. For years, I had buried all of my resentment. Then at one instant, everything came flooding out. I started to cry, ugly, out in front of everyone, and my whole family was there, startled. Years had passed without tears in front of them, yet all the resentment and grief I had been storing erupted. I was unable to stop it. I told everyone precisely how I felt, that for 8 years I had been treated as though my birthdays didn't count, as though I was just here to make my sister happy. I explained to them how sick I felt of trying to pass for normal. My relatives didn't know what to do. I informed them my parents had totally wrecked every birthday I had ever celebrated as they focused more on my sister than on me. Some of them offered apologies, claiming they had no idea it had been so horrible, but it made no difference. The harm was done. They had all let my parents abuse me like this for years, so I told them. No one ever spoke up for me. No one ever attempted to assist me. Not wanting to be there anymore, I left and sat by the family car. A few family members came out to check on me. My grandparents apologized, saying they hadn't helped me as they didn't know how awful it was. Though they said they should have spoken up sooner and they had been blind to the partiality, it did not make me feel any better. Where did they all live years ago? Why did it take my falling apart for them to understand the severity of things? My parents came out eventually as well. Although my dad was incensed that I had created a commotion, the rest of the family turned on my mom and dad. They shared with them just what they felt of their treatment of me. Never had I seen anything like that before. My parents seemed utterly hopeless. Neither of them could even stare me in the eye. My mother was weeping. They apologized for making my birthdays all about my sister, for the pink cake, and for everything else, but it didn't matter at the time. They promised to recreate the party, to have a real celebration only for me. They seemed to be apologizing solely since everyone was furious with them. I too lost it once they claimed I was too old to care about, thus not caring about birthdays anymore. I told them it had nothing to do with my age. Rather, it had to do with the reality they had snatched 8 years of my life from me. My grandparents attempted to cool me down, but I couldn't take it longer. I informed them I didn't want any more birthdays with them since they had made it plain I didn't matter. I had to leave here. I wanted their apologies, but I also wanted away from my parents. For me already, they had destroyed too much. After my breakdown at the birthday celebration, things did not simply miraculously heal. Actually, they deteriorated before they could even have an opportunity to become better. My folks came out of that Chuck E. Cheese copycat changed, discovered defeated. By then it was too late, even if they seemed to have at last realized what they had done. Though I wasn't ready to hear it, they tried to apologize. How can I? A few uncomfortable sorries won't be able to restore 8 years of being the forgotten child. My grandparents waited with me outside until my parents returned. At first, I had no idea what was occurring, but inside my relatives were giving them an earache. My parents lacked control of the story for the first time. Years of neglect of me were being faced, and to be honest, part of me was happy that everyone was at last calling them out. It did not, however, help me feel better. About half an hour later, my parents returned looking very exhausted. My dad couldn't even make eye contact with me, and my mom was still sniffling from so many tears, saying they understood how cruel they had been all those years. They once more apologized. They promised to rework my birthday celebration so that this time it would be all about me. But I was not interested. One of my uncles interrupted them with a loud, purposeful cough, and my parents nervously added that they had never let my sister blow out my candles again or provide gifts on my birthday. For the family, though, that felt insufficient. Another sharp cough occurred, and they apologized for ordering a cake obviously meant for my sister rather than me. Hearing that, I snapped. My mom tried to explain that I was too old for that stuff. Hence, they believed I wasn't into cake anymore. That was a mistake. I shouted at them, saying my age had nothing to do with it. For years, they had been celebrating my birthdays for my sister without even having a solid explanation for it. It mattered not what they did now, I told them. They had destroyed 8 years of my life. Why would I want to commemorate anything with them going ahead? Knowing deep down I meant nothing to them, what future birthdays could I possibly be looking forward to? Once more, my dad became irate, but the whole family intervened to calm him before he could speak. Usually avoiding these topics, my grandfather stood out and agreed I was exactly right. For treating me like I didn't matter ever since my sister was born, he called my parents out for showing preferences. I didn't anticipate him to tell them they were terrible parents. The whole family was responsible for allowing it to happen. Nobody, not alone my grandfather, was expected to show up there to defend me. But by then, I was emotionally exhausted to value it. Still in tears and in apology, my mother broke down once again, seeking to approach me. Not ready for her to approach me, though? I turned away her hug, and several of my cousins even physically blocked her from coming near. I started to leave, but one of my aunts caught up to me and pulled me back. I simply could not bear it anymore. As my relatives kept tearing into my parents, I could hear yelling and swearing emanating from within the restaurant. It ought to have felt like justice, but it did not. I was not delighted. All I was tired of was, while my grandmother cleaned up what remained of the party, I sat in their ancient minivan trying to cool down. Inside the restaurant, my sister was still having fun as nothing had changed. I wasn't even startled as she was unwrapping my presents. She seemed to either not care or not grasp what was happening. She ended up slamming a brand new smartphone against the wall and smashing since she was not permitted to retain it as one of the gifts. It made little difference that she had recently acquired a new phone for her birthday a few months previously. She wanted mine, too. Eventually, the celebration stopped, and my grandparents drove me to their house for the evening. Tucked under overwhelm, I told them I never wanted to celebrate my birthday once more. Saying that things will get better helped them console me, but I wasn't convinced. When I came home the next day, I still wasn't talking to my parents. My dad simply kept quiet like he didn't know what to say. My mom was a wreck, weeping every time I passed her. A week later, my grandparents persuaded me to go out to supper with them. The stress in the home was intolerable, so I kept locked in my room as much as I could. Though I had no idea what to anticipate, I was shocked to see a fresh party waiting for me at the restaurant. There were my parents, forcing grins as though they were trying to reassure everyone everything was under control. Among other things, there was a large chocolate cake with 18 candles featuring my name on a banner. Trying to make up for all I missed the previous time around, they dubbed it my belated birthday and graduation party. I felt nothing. Though one great celebration cannot redeem 8 years of neglect, it was a lovely deed. It did not offset what they had put me through. Still, I feigned happiness as I wanted to avoid launching another scene. About my sister, I wanted to avoid dealing with the aftermath once more. She was there too, pouting at the table with her arms crossed, since it was not entirely about her as it always was. She hardly even tried to cry or act out a rage when it was time to blow out the candles. I knew, though, that it was imminent. She screamed ear-piercing when I blew out the candles, and my parents had to get her out of the restaurant. Later, they brought her back looking more demoralized than ever. She only sat there silently sulking for the remainder of the party, but it was obvious she wasn't happy. Nevertheless, I still got the new smartphone she had cracked at the first party. My folks had substitutes for it. Still, that was only one aspect. To get me a car, my grandparents and a few other relatives had combined their funds. Though it was nothing fancy, just an old white Volvo, the moment I laid eyes on it, I adored it. My grandfather had fixed it personally, adding fresh tires and components. Of course, my sister wasn't delighted about that either. It was the first true present I'd received in years that seemed just for me. She threw out another one of her trademark cries as soon as she spotted the automobile, asking that she too have one. Right there, she had a tantrum, claiming it wasn't fair. My mom had to take her to the restroom to cool her off. They vanished for some time, and when they returned, my dad looked very exhausted. At this time, even my relatives were bored. My sister had managed to sour their attempt at atonement in front of the whole family. Several family members informed my parents that my sister was acting this way, as they had treated her rotten for years. They were accurate when they cautioned my parents that she would grow up into a nightmare grown-up if they neglected to start punishing her. My sister wrecked the automobile a few days later. She destroyed 2 of the side windows with a hammer and severely fractured the windshield, rendering the car undrivable. She shouted and battled her parents when they took the hammer away, but they were able to stop her before she caused further harm. She even tried biting them. Everyone, even my grandparents, was enraged with her. She wrecked that automobile in minutes when my grandfather had worked so hard on it. She couldn't stand the thought of my having anything she didn't since they had spoiled her so horribly. Once more, my other relatives lay on my parents, warning them they were preparing my sister for failure. That was the last straw. She was turning into a brat, expecting the world to revolve around her, and would have a horrible adult life if they did not set their foot down. Her grounding by my parents for the remainder of the summer was insufficient. Hoping that some rigorous discipline would help her get her act together, they made the tough choice to send her to boarding school for the next school year. My mom grieved for days over it, but my dad was determined. He realized they had screwed and that their only chance to begin mending the harm they had done was that nobody fought with them. They completely acknowledged that it was their fault my sister had turned out this way. They clearly were responsible. My sister suffered greatly in boarding school. She detested the restrictions, the clothing, and the fact that nobody regarded her as the princess she thought she was. She was continuously in trouble for lying and acting out of control, but she couldn't hide any of it since cameras were all around. Regarding me, my parents went to see her a few times, but every visit ended with her shouting at them for sending her there. I at last had freedom. My parents paid to have the automobile fixed, and by the end of the summer I was once more driving it. My granddad visited me in August carrying a job offer from a buddy of his. The only drawback was that the work was 40 miles away, so I had to leave the house unless I wanted to make that daily, lengthy journey. I seized the opportunity to move out. Although I had trouble locating my first apartment, I was authorized for a modest studio. My parents keep attempting to get in touch with me, but I hardly interact with them. I have been living there ever since, and it is the happiest I have been in years. Our conversations always feel awkward and unpleasant. Although my grandpa claims they are only attempting to hide how terribly they failed as parents, I am not ready to pardon them. Not yet. I'm at last content on my own, and for the first time in years they have no authority over me. They have lost me as well as her. My sister is at boarding school. Although I would not like their suffering, I understand that this is the outcome of their own acts, as they left an empty house and enraged family. The gap separating me from my parents became even more vast by the time I moved into my new flat. It was psychological as well, not only bodily. Every effort they made to get in felt superficial, as though they were doing it as required rather than out of any desire. I found that to be good. Their poor care was not what I needed. While my sister was adjusting to boarding school, I was concentrated on constructing my life and wanted them to pull me back into their chaos. Though I had no interest, my parents kept me informed. She was having problems adjusting to the rigorous surroundings, was frequently in trouble for rule violations, lied, and had tantrums, they informed me. She had spent her whole life without restrictions, so she didn't know how to manage it now that she was obliged to obey guidelines. Though this was exactly what everyone had advised my parents about, they hadn't listened until it was too late. Things grew darker when my sister sought to control her exit from the institution. She turned to drastic means to acquire what she wanted, as she was not used to people rejecting her. She first tried not eating, believing that our parents would rush to take her home if she starved herself. Of course, my mother almost did, but my father stopped her, telling her that giving in now would just make matters worse. Before she relented, my sister's hunger strike lasted only 2 days. She then attempted harassing the other girls in the school, but they weren't having any of it. She got into a fight one day and paid for it. Before a teacher intervened, a number of females gathered around her and quite seriously battered her. She was in great agony but was not gravely hurt. She was bruised all over. She also blamed everyone but herself, of course. The worst came when my sister tried something considerably more perilous. She grabbed a knife from the cafeteria and ascended upon a table, threatening to cut herself unless they provided her chocolates and sent her home. Indeed, candy. When I heard about it, I couldn't even understand how my sister had arrived at this place. It was so absurd. Years of spoiling and indulging had produced this. Now she was using manipulation and self-harm threats to attempt to dominate others. The school tried to calm her down, offering her some sweets while they addressed the matter. She did, however, slip and fall off the table at some point, fracturing her arm and collarbone and suffering a concussion. That was it about the residential school. They did not want her back then. Her self-damaging behavior served as a wake-up call for everyone, and my parents had to decide what to do with her going forward. They sent her to a children's mental health facility instead of bringing her home. She was labeled with narcissistic tendencies, a quality our parents had fostered in her. They informed me she would not be let go until she had exhibited notable development. For my junk food-addicted sister, this was her own nightmare. She was also compelled to keep to a rigorous, nutritious diet and finish her education from the ward. My mother was heartbroken by the whole situation. My father stopped her once she wanted to go fetch my sister out of the ward. They battled over it non-stop, and it became quite terrible. During one of their fights, my mother snapped and gave my dad a glass bottle blow to the face. It split on contact, breaking his cheekbone and wounding him. This was the turning point for my parents when the police were contacted and my dad had to be transported to the hospital while my mom was detained. When my mother was compelled to get a psychiatric assessment, it found out she was coping with major personal mental health problems. For a few months, she was housed in a facility where she started facing her own traumas, events from her upbringing she had never addressed. Though I'm not sure all the specifics, my grandparents informed me that it helped explain a lot of her conduct, particularly with regard to allowing my sister's worst impulses to flourish. There was even discussion of divorce between my parents, but it never went beyond their separate bedroom sleeping arrangement. My father looked to be lost. He understood for the first time in his life just how terribly they had screwed things. I kept my distance while my mother was being treated for her own problems and my sister was in a mental health institution. Their ideal family was disintegrating all around. I wanted to be away from their turmoil. I had moved out for a purpose. That did not stop them, though, from trying to connect. I responded little when they messaged me, inquiring how I was doing. It seems useless. Around the time of my 19th birthday, my grandparents gave me a little celebration at a restaurant I loved. They were contacting me because they cared. They were doing it because they wanted to feel like they hadn't failed totally. Though it was little, just a simple supper with them, it seemed natural, like how birthdays ought always to have been. When my parents arrived, they looked as though they were trying to make things appear good, forced joy on their faces. When I saw her, my sister appeared thinner and more resentful. She was even let outside of the ward for the day. She sat there gazing at me the whole time, like she still expected to be the center of attention. When it came time to blow out my candles, my sister didn't shout like she used to. Rather, she began to cry, ugly, like I had done at my 18th birthday. Still, I knew her really well. This was manipulation, not about grief. She was attempting to take center stage in her own warped manner. She started weeping and asking why again and over, like she couldn't understand why things weren't going her way. Then she had the arrogance to throw a fit, yelling about how there was no pizza or presents for her. She cursed at our parents, trying to bolt from the restaurant, but my grandfather was not having it. Pulling my parents apart, he advised them to once and for once break this cycle. He cautioned them not to cower in response to her demands, as doing so would never stop. My sister heard everything. When she realized her outbursts were not working, she threw another rage, kicking and screaming as my parents drove her home early. She would be enabling her for life. Following my grandparents, I waited behind, attempting to savor the last of the evening, though knowing that nothing had actually changed made it difficult. My sister was still the same entitled brat she had always been, and my parents were still figuring out how to handle her. She was sent back to the ward that morning and is still there. Of course, she detests it there. She is still acting out, attempting to control her exit, but it is not working now. She is stranded, and for the first time in her life, she is facing consequences for her actions. She will take a long time to change, if she ever does. Nobody has blamed me for any of this. Nor my parents, nor my granddad. Everyone agrees that her upbringing explains why my sister is the way she is. She is the result of their non-restrained, persistent enabling. My father even acknowledged to me that although they needed to have intervened far earlier, now it is beyond their control. She is in the system. Nobody knows how long she will be there. Regarding myself, I'm doing okay. Though it's been challenging, living on my own is far better than living in that house. I now budget my money, handle my expenses, and take care of myself. Though it's difficult, it's freeing. My parents keep reaching out, but I'm not ready to forgive them. Not as yet. Perhaps eventually. Just now, I need space. Although my grandfather claimed they were attempting to feel better about themselves by having me forgive them, I am not doing it for their benefit. They have their hands full. I am focused on my future, not theirs. Though she is back home, my mother is a shell of her former self, sluggish from her current medications. She still works, but she was demoted and now makes less. While my father is simply trying to keep things together, it is obvious he does not know how to mend all of this. They have lost my sister and me. All they can do now is cope with the fallout from their decisions. They have an empty house and damaged relationships. Though the months after my 19th birthday were peaceful, the type of stillness that seems weighty, that of peace following a storm. I felt as though my parents and I lived on different planets, as I had kept such great distances between us. They made efforts to remain in touch, leaving voicemails I hardly responded to or texting. I kept focused on my profession, trying my best to fit the obligations of maturity. However, for the first time I had control over my own life, and I was not ready to give that up by slinking back into the mess they had produced. Paying bills, creating a budget, deciding what to make for supper, it was not simple, but it was mine. Knowing that every move I took was one I had chosen for myself gave me great empowerment. There is no more family drama, no more juggling my sister's outbursts or my parents' ceaseless enabling. Of course, I knew things hadn't altered much back home. Still, it was a blank slate, and I felt like I was breathing once more. Despite my not asking, my grandparents kept me informed. From what they informed me, my sister was miserable while still in the mental health hospital. She detested the guidelines, the discipline, the organization, all the things she had never experienced prior. She tried every tactic she knew, lying, manipulation, even self-harm, to get out of the hospital, but nothing worked. She had been educated to think that the world revolved around her, so now, being in an atmosphere where she could not get her way was driving her insane. The workers lacked the demeanor of our parents. They did not cower to her requests. They held her responsible for her activities, made her obey the policies, and kept her there. She was precisely what she needed, but knowing my sister, it was the last thing she wanted. I heard she was still having outbursts, throwing fits anytime she didn't way was denied. She even tried to stage an injury at one point, thinking it would get her sent home, but they saw straight through it. Strange, really. After all she went through, you would think she would start to grow wise. Her attitude of entitlement had been ingrained for so long, though, that it was not going away naturally. My parents were also suffering. After returning from the mental hospital, my mother seemed different. She remained quiet on the medicine they prescribed, but it also numbed her and made her seem remote. Thanks to her time spent away, she was still working, but now in a lower-paying position. Well, my dad was clearly overburdened, even though he was doing his best to keep everything together. I believe my dad at last saw exactly how much harm they had done, not just to my sister, but also to me. They had both lost control of the circumstances and now were paying for it. He started trying to get in touch more frequently, writing long messages, apologizing, and expressing his desire to put things right, but I didn't reply. Not able to. For what reason was the point? It wasn't about being stubborn or keeping a grudge. It was about self-preservation. They had spent so many years giving my sister first priority, so many years making me feel like I didn't exist, that I didn't understand how they could just repair all of that with few apologies. I was not about to let any serenity I had at last pull me back into their anarchy. I kept distance from him then. Though I concentrated on my own future and on creating a life free from their dysfunction, I couldn't ignore the weight of all that had transpired, even with the distance. I thought about it a lot, about the years of neglect, the anniversaries I missed, the way my sister had seized my life. Not feeling furious or that I had been deprived of something vital was difficult until, one day, something shifted. Of all the people, my sister contacted me. It was a brief, straightforward message, but it startled me. She turned around and said, "Not for everything, but for enough." Growing up, she said she had been terrible to me. She now understood how unjust it had all been. Her treatment, she claimed, had let her see how disorganized her conduct had been. She wanted to let me know she was trying to change. She did not seek forgiveness. I had no idea how to respond. One hand, it was the first time in my life my sister had ever admitted what she had done to me. Still, it was difficult to accept she might actually change. Could someone like her truly grow to be a better person after everything? I didn't react right away. I wasn't sure, but appreciated the letter for what it was. A little step in the right direction. I needed time to sort everything out. I had been poisoned in my connection with my sister for so long that I had no idea how to treat her now that she was attempting to be different. Though another side of me knew I couldn't let my defenses down, part of me wanted to think she might change. While I was dealing with it, My parents were still working on things on their end. I had been injured too many times to really trust her. Their own therapy sessions were helping them to sort through the years of errors they had committed. Though from what I heard, they were still on unstable ground. At least they were trying. I believe they at last realized the seriousness of what they had done. They sought to atone with me by volunteering to assist in whatever capacity. They were not only poor parents, they had intentionally harmed my sister and me and would need time to recover from that. To spend the holidays with them and attempt to reconnect, they even inquired as to if I wanted to return home for Thanksgiving. I said no as well as not yes, not yet ready to return to that house. Perhaps never. Thanksgiving came and went, and I sat in my apartment silently considering everything. Though the road was sluggish, I understood I was headed forward. While I was learning to let go of the past, I also understood that forgiveness was not something I could offer freely. It had to be earned. My parents still had a long road ahead. As the new year dawned, I had clarity. I had no need to hang on to all the agony from my early years. Indeed, my parents had let me down in many respects, and sure, my sister had been a nightmare for most of my life. But right now, I was out of that. I had the ability to choose how much, if any, I wanted them in my life. I was establishing a life for myself devoid of them. I decided then. Not for the holidays, not for birthdays, not for any other reason, I was not going to visit that place. I was not going to totally exclude them either, though. I would leave the door open just enough to check if an actual change was feasible. Though I was ready to quit bearing the weight of their errors on my shoulders, I was not ready to forgive them. Healing would take time. I couldn't allow my sister's maybe never completely change to define me anymore. My parents might never really grasp the magnitude of what they had done. I continued since I had my own life now, ambitions and future to concentrate on. I worked, lived, and flourished in ways I never would have imagined. Though it always will be a part of me, the past has no bearing on me now. More than anything, the true triumph was that I felt free. First in a long time. Story 2. My confidence in loyalty and trust within my family has been tested by the tremendous family drama I've found myself in at the age of 42. My 64-year-old father, a heavy diesel technician who has been my business partner and mentor for almost a decade, suddenly disclosed something that utterly upended my life. For some context, he has spent his whole career running a modest mechanic workshop. I've always been enthralled with my dad's work and used to help out in his workshop on the weekends. Because of this desire, I decided to get a degree in automotive engineering so that I could formally work for my dad. Since the age of 23. Working as a mechanic with my dad, I've been progressively assuming greater responsibility till I ultimately took over running his workshop. My dad just had one car and 2 part-time mechanics when I started working in the business. I applied a number of novel tactics, drawing on my training and expertise, which resulted in notable expansion throughout the past 10 years. We now employ more than 35 people and have a fleet of 15 vehicles. From an annual income of $250,000 to almost $7 million this fiscal year, we have experienced a rapid increase in financial growth. While I've assumed a managerial function that is more focused on the office, my dad's role has mostly stayed in the workshop. I have dedicated the past 10 years to rebuilding our family business from the ground up and improving it. The innumerable hours of labor, the difficulties I've encountered, and the sacrifices I've made weren't all for selfish reasons. They were motivated by the hope that I would eventually inherit and go on growing this company. For me, it became more than simply a job. It was my duty and my passion. With unwavering determination, I've steered through difficult periods, braved through many storms, and celebrated our victories. Michael, my 48-year-old older brother, chose a different route in life. After attending college, he made a name for himself in the city as an accountant. He never expressed any interest in our dad's repair company, unlike me. During his childhood, he actually detested it. He frequently refused to even recognize our dad's profession as a mechanic in front of our friends because he felt ashamed of it. Michael would get upset with me while I was assisting our dad in the workshop, claiming that such labor was beneath us. Michael constantly tried to dissuade me from pursuing a degree in automotive engineering, even though I was becoming increasingly passionate about them. He would advise me to pursue a more distinguished job and claim that my degree in automotive engineering was a dead end. It's interesting to note that my dad always saw Michael as his golden kid, even though he was obviously embarrassed by our dad's occupation. Despite Michael's lack of interest in the family company and our father's profession, this partiality was still evident. Things weren't like this at one point. My father used to treat us both with equal care, but when Michael turned 15, everything was different. Our family was really concerned when he had pneumonia and was confined to bed. He may be in danger of dying, the doctors warned us, expressing grave worries about his condition. We were all going through a really tough time. I can still clearly remember how terrified and anxious I was that Michael may die during his whole hospital stay. It was a turning point that appeared to change our family's dynamics. Our dad was always Michael's top priority. He would constantly ask for our father. They bonded deeply since my dad spent many nights in the hospital. In due course, after Michael's recovery, everything returned to usual. Even though Michael would later come to despise our father's line of work, my dad persisted in favoring him throughout the years. In any case, Dad liked him and didn't mind. As I grew older, I became aware of this partiality and was naturally offended that our father consistently gave preference to Michael. For instance, when my school had an award ceremony and I was ready to get one, I informed my parents that I was really proud of myself for winning. My dad gave me a warm grin and congratulated me, while my mother gave me a hug. I told my parents they were invited to our award ceremony by the school. Given her hard career, I knew my mother might not be able to make it. She worked long nights at the hospital, leaving her fatigued during the day. I then went to my dad in the hopes that he would confirm his attendance, feeling a sense of expectancy. With a trace of hesitancy, he turned his gaze back to me and then to my mother. Then she turned to him and asked if he could be present for me at the wedding. After clearing his throat, my dad announced that he and Michael were going to play basketball. After giving him a stern look, my mother informed him that it wasn't necessary to play basketball with Michael and that he could bring Michael to my award ceremony instead. My father reluctantly gave a nod of approval. During supper the evening before the event, my mother told my dad to make sure he attended my award ceremony. Michael asked my dad whether he was skipping that basketball session as he was seated at the dinner table. They could always play basketball the next week, my dad told him. Michael began complaining right away, stating that he didn't want to waste his time on my ceremony and that he was eager to spend time with his father. My mother retaliated against him by berating my older brother for not showing sympathy or encouragement. She even went so far as to insist that our parents get together for once and be there for me on the big day, especially because I had just won an award. As I made my way to school, I had to frantically remind my dad again, praying he wouldn't disappoint me. He assured me that he will be present at my award ceremony, and that I shouldn't worry about it. I searched everywhere for my dad, but I was unable to locate him. After a while, my name was called, and I had to approach the stage to pick up my prize. As my classmates applauded, I recall the principal giving me my trophy, and I was desperately searching the throng for my dad's face. He never arrived. I messaged my mom to let her know that my dad had never arrived. She contacted me right away, worried, and asked if I was certain my dad hadn't arrived. I told her that he wasn't there and that perhaps he had forgotten. Since she had set 5 alerts on his phone and was unable to see his car parked in front of our house, my mother informed me it was not conceivable and that he was undoubtedly gone. Right now. We were anxious because we thought something terrible may have happened. I gingerly pulled the door open when I got home from school to find my parents fighting an angry and intense argument. The atmosphere was so tight that you could almost cut it with a knife, and their voices were elevated to a thunderous level. I was shocked and incredulous when my parents' raging dispute echoed down the whole corridor. My dad, appearing guilty and defensive, was trying to defend his conduct while my mother, her face twisted with rage, stood close to the door. I gingerly entered our living room, feeling both confused and worried. Curious, I asked my dad whether he was all right. As I said that he never attended the award ceremony at my school, my anxiety was evident. As my dad muttered an apology and avoided making eye contact, the room became momentarily quiet. It has to do with time loss and unanticipated events. I sensed that there was something wrong with his explanation. However, my mother let out a torrent of annoyance and disappointment before I could ask any more questions. "John, why did you come?" Her voice was abrasive and accusing as she demanded, "Tell the truth to me. You assured our son that you would be present when he received an award. Is there anything more significant than that?" Before he could reply, Dad shifted uneasily, obviously aware that he was in the hot seat. Michael walked casually into the room while munching on some ice cream. My mother narrowed her eyes in shock and rage as she swung her ire at Michael. "What the devil were you and your father thinking, Michael? When your brother most needed you, where were you all? On his special day?" With a non-committal shrug, Michael replied that he had persuaded our dad to take him to the ice cream shop first because he had an unexpected craving for the treat. They went on to my school, only to discover that they had missed the entire award ceremony. As if that weren't awful enough, they just drove back home, leaving me high and dry. As my mother took in this ridiculous justification, her expression changed from one of rage to one of disbelief. "You didn't attend your brother's ice cream award ceremony," she said, her voice rising incredulously. "You and your father missed his big moment because you wanted ice cream." Amidst the escalating tension, my dad, instead of apologizing and admitting his mistake, tried to defend Michael and justify his actions, stammering out an explanation that only added fuel to the fire. "Look, it's not a big deal," he began, attempting to downplay the significance of my award ceremony. "It's just an award ceremony, and there will be more in the future." Michael wanted an ice cream, and I thought we could just grab a quick one. I didn't think it was such a big deal. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't wrap my head around it. The man I had counted on my own father was downplaying the importance of my accomplishment, the way he casually dismissed the moment I had been eagerly anticipating. His words lingering in the air left me utterly speechless. What had begun as sheer disbelief now evolved into a powerful blend of anger and sorrow, a potent cocktail of frustration and sadness coursing through me. A lump formed in my throat, and I felt the sting of unshared tears. My achievement, the recognition for my hard work and dedication, was being swept aside as inconsequential. But that moment, I realized that it wasn't just about missing the ceremony. It was about the lack of understanding, the absence of support, and the crushing feeling that my accomplishments were not valued by those I held closest. I gazed at my dad, the very person I had counted on for support, my eyes reflecting a turbulent mix of disbelief and betrayal. The deep disappointment that had taken hold of my heart was vividly mirrored in my expression. Meanwhile, my mother did not hold back, voicing her own disappointment and berating them both for choosing an impulsive ice cream craving over a monumental achievement in my life. Their heated argument raged on. Adding to the chaos of the moment, I continued to feel a sense of betrayal and hurt, feeling a heavy weight on my chest and a lump in my throat. I mustered a weak smile and told my dad, "It's okay, Dad. Don't worry about it." The words tasted bitter on my tongue, forced out to mask the deep emotions swirling within me. I didn't want to escalate the argument or add more strain to the already tense atmosphere. As I made my way back to my room, the facade I had carefully crafted for my dad disintegrated with the door firmly shut behind me. I finally let go. Tears that I had battled to hold back in front of my parents now streamed freely down my face. The sheer weight of sadness, the sting of betrayal, and the profound sensation of being let down all slammed over me like a tidal wave, leaving me absolutely overwhelmed. My mom, seeing me distressed, came into my room to soothe me. She sat alongside me, placing her arm around my shoulder. She didn't say much, just let me weep and release my frustrations. Her presence was calming, and I felt a bit better knowing she was there for me. After a time, she spoke quietly. "I know it hurts, dear. Your dad messed up, and I'm sorry you had to go through this. Sometimes individuals make errors, but it doesn't take away from your success. You worked hard for that prize, and nothing can change that. Her comments were like a warm hug for my spirit, and I began to feel a bit lighter. She stayed with me until I calmed down, telling me that despite the disappointment, I was still cherished and loved. There have been several moments when my dad's apparent bias towards Michael over me has been painfully evident. On several occasions, my mother has questioned him over this matter. Every time, my dad seems to actually listen and tries to be more involved in my life. But it never lasts long, and in the end, he goes back to being Michael's great dad. I have noticed this tendency often throughout my life. I have always made a concerted effort to get my dad's favor, even in spite of these instances of prejudice. I genuinely enjoy his work, and I especially grew to adore automobiles because, despite the fact that it sometimes appeared like a one-sided endeavor, it seemed to be something he treasured. I never gave up hope that my efforts would finally pay off and bring me the respect and admiration I so much want from my father. Due to irreconcilable disagreements, my dad filed for divorce from my mother last year, ushering in a difficult period for our family. Although I had known for a few years that my mother and father were having increasingly heated disagreements, I never thought they would be divorcing. For our family, it was a trying period. My dad has been seeing a number of younger ladies in the last few months. He invited Michael and me to what he said was an important dinner around 5 months ago. The tension in the room increased as we sat at the table, and I felt a knot in my gut as I prepared myself for the shocking revelation. With a serious look, my father was going to deliver. At last, he broke the stillness and started talking. "I want to tell you both something really essential. I married Olivia. He gave us the impression that he thought we would be thrilled or at the very least agree with his choice." Michael and I looked at each other in disbelief. Just a few years younger than me, Olivia, his most recent lover, was just 30 years old. It must have been obvious how shocked we were, but my dad went on, as if he didn't notice. He continued by describing how he had fallen in love once more and how Olivia had filled his life with energy and joy. It seemed unbelievable to me that my father had chosen to be married without even asking us to attend or talking to us about it. After making that statement, my dad continued to express his pride in the company. Over the years, he had developed and expanded. He mentioned that he has been considering his company's succession strategy recently. I eagerly awaited his announcement of his plans. After giving this a lot of thought, my father turned to face me and informed me that I need not worry about inheriting the family company from him because I was not yet married and had no children of my own. As he began to explain his choice to hand over the whole company to Michael, I looked at him in complete bewilderment. I was overcome by waves of shock and incredulity, and I found it difficult to comprehend the overwhelming sensation of betrayal that had suddenly taken over my life. My faith in my father crumbled before my very eyes, and it felt like a terrible blow to the heart. When my father revealed this shocking information, I felt a wave of rage and betrayal wash over me. My whole world, which I had worked so hard to build over the past 10 years, was falling apart in front of my eyes. My mouth was clenched as I gazed at him, incapable of appreciating the gravity of his choice. "Why," I managed to say at last, fuming with a mixture of hurt and rage, "I have devoted my life to this enterprise. Together we constructed it. How are you able to just give it to Michael?" Dad, who didn't appear to mind the commotion he had caused, gave an explanation of his thinking. "Michael has a wife, children, and a family. I think he can grow the company to new heights, but he needs financial stability." I could feel his preference weighing down on me once more as his comments lingered in the air. I had a hard time being calm. I balled my hands into fists. "This is unfair. I've put my everything into this company. I've put my time and effort into working with you. And now that Michael has a family, you're just going to ignore me. And what about my future? My dreams?" His reaction was heartless. "The business goes to your brother, but you can stay in your job and continue to work for Michael. That quote is my ultimate choice." Even though I was furious, I controlled myself enough to not react. I looked at Michael, hoping for even a shred of sympathy or understanding. I was disappointed that he said nothing, avoiding making eye contact. I was now disappointed in more than just my father. It engulfed my brother, who had chosen not to accompany me at that crucial juncture. A lifetime of partiality was weighing down on me like a crushing weight. It was more than simply business. It was the result of years of feeling inferior. I waved casually, dismissing the sacrifice and effort I shown. "Resigned. If that's what you want, Dad," I mumbled a defeated fine. I looked aside. The air is tinged with the harsh flavor of betrayal. I made the decision to leave his home without arguing with him anymore. No matter how much I worked over my dad, he still preferred his golden kid, and I couldn't get rid of the sense of abandonment. Later, when I was alone at home, the injustice's weight was bearing down on me. I thought of the company as my legacy. The work of my life was slipping away from me. My eyesight became blurry as tears filled my eyes and agony filled the room. Never in my life have I felt so rejected and alone. I felt completely abandoned. I decided to contact my mother in the hopes that she would understand how deeply troubled I was. My mother listened with a mixture of amazement and dismay as I described the whole experience, from my dad's obvious bias for Michael to him taking away the family company from me and the overpowering feeling of being lost. I didn't think he would get this far. At long last, my mother spoke up. There was anguish in her voice. It is utterly unjust to treat Michael so much better and give him the entire company rather than splitting it evenly between the two of you. I didn't mind sharing the business with Michael, but my dad had unfairly given it to him entirely, so her remarks perfectly captured how I felt. As we continued our conversation, my mother's tone changed from astonishment to determination, despite the years of hard work I had put in. She strongly advised me to try to view this as an opportunity for something new rather than the end. You don't need his approval since you've accomplished incredible things. Why don't you launch your own company? Many clients would prefer to work with you over Michael, you know. Her words were audible. I felt a spark of resolve ignite inside of me. My father was wrong if he believed he could take away everything I had earned. A silent vow was fueled by the hurt of betrayal. From the ashes of what had been stolen from me over the past decade, I would carve out my own way and create something new. I have more than enough money saved up to launch my own company. As the situation's reality set in the following day, I decided to take matters into my own hands and started a plan of action. I made contact with a large percentage of our clientele, especially those I had personally recruited over the years. These were the customers I had developed close bonds with and gained their confidence. I openly shared my father's plan to transfer ownership of the entire company to my older brother and explained why I decided to start my own business. The clients were just as surprised as I was, but to my surprise, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. These individuals had grown to respect my commitment, work ethic, and the principles I upheld. They promised to follow me in order to carry on our fruitful collaboration under a different name. The industry was informed that I was leaving the family business, and some of my dad's employees even came up to me to say they wanted to work for me. It seemed as though people were beginning to realize that this would be a sinking ship once my dad left the company in Michael's care. My dad was shocked when I gave him my letter of resignation. He chastised me for leaving the company at such a critical time, but I dismissed his remark with contempt and departed as most of the clientele switched. My dad unintentionally became entangled in the turmoil of the fallout from his ambitious plan as the once thriving family business began to collapse. He watched helplessly as his well-thought-out plan went horribly wrong. My new business took off in the months that followed. Together with my experience, the steadfast support of devoted customers not only guaranteed my survival, but also helped me flourish. My rebirth was sparked by my father's betrayal, which caused me to rise from the ashes as a stronger and more resilient person than before. My perseverance is demonstrated by the successful and self-sufficient business I have established. Now that I've overcome all obstacles thanks to my perseverance, hard work, and dedication, I can finally enjoy the last laugh. My mother has informed me that Michael is having trouble keeping the remaining customers and has no idea how to run the company. My dad must have heard about my success because he sent me a lengthy message yesterday calling me a jerk for abandoning my family and failing to support my brother and the family business. He wrote about his financial difficulties and how his new wife, Olivia, threatened to file for divorce since he could no longer support her way of life. He encouraged me to follow his moral convictions as he wrapped up his message, going back to the family business and getting all the customers I had gained in an attempt to save our faltering family business. In regards to my situation, I would like to sincerely thank everyone who has given me insightful counsel and comfort. To dispel any misunderstandings, I continue to be perplexed as to why my father believed it was a good idea for Michael to take over the company. Given that we all knew he had no idea how our family business operated, Michael complied with my father's requests because he was aware of how well our company was doing and believed that I would handle the majority of the responsibilities. He had previously told us that he was dissatisfied with his job. He probably assumed that I would handle the majority of the labor-intensive tasks for him so that he and his family could enjoy the CEO title. If you're wondering why I haven't gotten married yet, it's because I've always been devoted to my career and a bit of a recluse. Even though my girlfriend of the past 1.5 years and I have talked about getting married in the future, we both agree that we want to take some time to mature as people before moving forward, regardless of whether or not we are married. I never thought my father would give me full control of the company. If I didn't have any future children, I would have been more than happy with a 7,030 split or even a 5,050 split with Michael because it would have been fair. My goal was to ensure a family legacy by eventually transferring my share of the business to Michael's offspring. In any case, my dad had no justification for being so cruel and handing Michael the whole company. Since I have worked in this industry for 10 years, I am entitled to a portion of it. Additionally, I never pressured any of the customers to pick me over my dad's company. I was the one who always went above and beyond to make sure they were satisfied and to establish enduring relationships, which is why they chose to work with me. I never wanted our family business to fail or Michael to fail. My dad was too preoccupied with Olivia to concentrate on his clients, and Michael was still inexperienced with the firm, which is why it collapsed. My father may have thought that I would ultimately quit my business and rush back to him, pleading for his pardon when my unrelenting commitment and hard work finally caused me to fail. I not only stand resolute, but continue to prosper. It's truly disheartening to witness the gradual decline of a business. I played a significant role in building. However, it's crucial to recognize that this outcome is a direct result of their own decisions and not something I ever intended. I intend to have a candid conversation with my dad next week, when I have some free time to address these pressing issues. I finally had the long-awaited conversation with my dad. He called me over for dinner last weekend expecting an apology. I went to his place. I entered his place, and to my shock, saw Michael sitting there waiting for me. The atmosphere was tense, but I hoped they had called me here for a resolution. My dad took a deep breath, exchanging a glance with Michael before dropping the news. He started by saying how he was sad over what had happened between us, and he regrets that our family business was now in pieces. I raised an eyebrow, bracing myself for what was to come, expecting him to say that he had changed his mind. Instead, my dad started pressuring me to return to the family business as soon as possible, claiming he would forgive and forget if I did come back. Michael joined the conversation, pinning the blame on me for the business's decline. His own challenges and even labeling me as selfish for departing and leaving him to handle the business alone. I was left in disbelief by his accusations. Dad, you chose to entrust the entire business to Michael without considering my future at all. How can you put this at my feet? I shot back, my fury swelling to the surface. Michael sneered, adding, the actual issue is that you took the majority of the clientele with you when you quit. That's the root of the problem. They followed me because of the bonds I created, not because I forced them. You were invited to attempt to get them back. If you are that successful with maintaining clients, your existing clients would have not left the business either. I fought, feeling the weight of their accusations. My dad sighed. Look, I don't want to see the family company break apart. It's my source of money and it's how I support my lifestyle. Olivia has also left me because of all of this. Rather than attempting to settle this continuous family drama, I would want to enjoy my retirement in peace. So, simply return to work for your brother and quit being so self-centered. The atmosphere became oppressively thick, and the room seemed to shrink. This was neither the apology or settlement I had hoped for, I realized. Rather, it seemed like an effort to force me back into a circumstance from which I had struggled to escape. I stood up, stunned and hurt, my rage boiling. I gave my dad a fierce gaze and said, "I'm done with this conversation. I will be happy to see your company fail." I left the poisonous conversation after saying that. I've been inundated with calls and texts from Dad and Michael ever since this chat. They have been accusing me of everything and calling me derogatory names. Seeing my own relatives try to profit off my labors is extremely upsetting. Therefore, I have banned them for the time being. My previous edit was 6 months ago. I'm pleased to say that my business is doing well, and I want to ask my girlfriend to marry me in the near future. I can't wait to be happily wedded to her since she is unquestionably the one for me. In a less optimistic vein. As Michael pushed his firm into the ground, my dad had to deal with difficulties. My dad ultimately had to sell the entire firm to a different corporation. Unfortunately, he did not gain much from the sale, and Olivia claimed what he did get after their divorce. I have stopped their communication and purposefully distanced myself from both of them. I quote, "V occasionally spoken with relatives and friends about these changes. My bond with my mother has surprisingly improved during the past few months. In contrast to what one might anticipate, she treats Michael and me equally and has been a source of understanding and support throughout this turbulent period. She supports my new business and knows what I'm doing. She also told me that because the firm has failed, Michael intends to return to accounting. In spite of the difficulties in my household, I am appreciative of the happiness and security in my own life. Keeping my attention on the good, my girlfriend's support, and my closer relationship with my mother are both tremendous sources of strength. I'm still committed to making my business ventures successful. I have hope for the future and am dedicated to transforming obstacles into chances for development and achievement. Story 3. In order to give preference to his friend's son, my dad gave up my future. They are now bearing the consequences. I never imagined that I would write this. To be honest, it's one of those situations when you reflect on how you got here. However, here we are. I'm currently 28 years old, and the older I become, the more I understand how deeply my history has damaged me. It quote like looking back, but not in a depressing sense. It's clear how everything transpired. It comes down to one individual for the most part, my father. I was born into a less than ideal circumstance. Shortly after giving birth to me, my mother fled. She simply packed up her belongings and vanished, not like she died or anything. Nothing. No notice, no warning. She is with me in the hospital one day, and then she is gone the next. Nobody even knows her whereabouts. Indeed, I have heard the typical tales of mothers experiencing stress. Not in a decent mental state or not prepared for children. But as a child, I didn't care about any of it. I only knew that she wasn't present. And for some reason, my dad saw me as the bad guy because of it. My dad has harbored a grudge against me since I can remember. At first, it was imperceptible, as if he would simply be aloof, icy, and essentially soulless. I didn't understand it as a child. As I grew older, though, I understood that he was more than simply chilly. He absolutely detested me. Why? Since I resembled her. She was unknown to me. However, the likeness is striking based on the images I've seen. And I suppose he thought about her leaving him every time he looked at me. But that's quite a weight to place on a child, isn't it? Living in that home as a child was like having to tread very carefully. The worst part, however, I had no idea what I was doing incorrectly. I was just trying to make ends meet like a child. However, I served as a continual reminder of the departing woman to him. He wasn't very violent or anything. Not in the conventional sense, but rather the absence of love and warmth that affects you in ways you are unaware of, until much later. Yes, he provided for me food and clothing, but that was the extent of his parental involvement. No. There are times when I'm proud of you. Not even a hug? No. How did your day go? Converses over supper. It was nothing but void. Liam was the next person. The dearest buddy of my dad has a kid named Liam. My dad took Liam in when his mother ended up in a mental hospital and Liam's father died in a vehicle accident. When we were both about 7 years old, Liam moved into our home. And believe me when I say that everything changed at that point. Perhaps having another child around would help to lighten the atmosphere or provide me with a companion. However, Liam was no longer a mere child. My father had always desired a son like him. Compared to me, my dad's gaze on Liam was completely different. I was nothing compared to Liam. He was gregarious, self-assured, athletic, and the type of young man who could make anyone fall in love. I was the reserved, quiet one in the meanwhile. I was content to read and be alone. Furthermore, my dad saw me as nothing more than a reminder of my mother's treachery. Liam, the golden boy, was him. There was no chance for me. I can recall several occasions when I did something that I felt was noteworthy or deserving of some recognition, but my dad would not even look at me. For example, I once worked on a scientific project for school for weeks at a time. It was a rotating replica of the entire solar system. Quite amazing for a child, isn't it? This is it, I thought. This will make him notice me at last. I was eager to see him when I got home, but he and Liam were watching a football game on the couch. He gave me a half-hearted nod before returning his attention to the TV after I explained the proposal. I didn't even seem to be there. Liam, meanwhile, was praised for doing everything he wanted. In school, he could sketch something passably, and my dad would display it on the refrigerator as if it were a masterpiece. The disparity in treatment was absurd. He didn't even make an effort to conceal his preference for Liam. The fact that I persisted in attempting, rather than the overt bias, was, in my opinion, the worst aspect. I kept thinking that he would notice me at last if I could simply do this or that. At last he will be concerned. However, nothing was ever sufficient. It just got worse as we grew older. I attended the same school as Liam, but it made no difference that I performed better academically. Liam was the popular one, the athlete. For my dad, it didn't matter much that I was the student who performed well in school. "Well, grades don't mean everything," he would reply, or "Liam has bigger things to focus on." It seemed as though everything I achieved was irrelevant unless it was connected to Liam's accomplishments. I was only the opening act, and he was always the star. Nobody gave a damn. I can't count the number of times I sat in my room trying to figure out what was wrong with me. What prevented me from being more like Liam? Why wasn't I sufficient? The problem is, though, it was never about me. It was always about him, even if I didn't recognize it at the time. Regarding my dad's incapacity to handle his own mess. He never recovered after my mother's departure, and he simply threw all of his anger onto Liam and myself rather than dealing with it. He's not even to fault. Like me, he was only a child. However, based on his treatment, my dad most likely believed he was a superhero. Why wouldn't he too? While I was only a supporting role, my dad made him feel like the center of the world. Now that I think about it, I realize how chaotic the entire thing was. You don't truly understand that as a child, though. You simply never give up. Wishing for a change in the future. Your father may eventually treat you the same way he does the other child. But for me, that day never arrived, and it remained that way for years. Me, alone in the shadow of Liam and my mother. I didn't comprehend I needed to quit attempting to achieve something I would never attain until much later. The golden kid was him. My father pretended that Liam was a cosmic gift or something, as if he were the ideal son he had always desired. To be honest, it felt as though I had vanished from the scene. They would be laughing and watching TV on the couch when I got home from school, like if I didn't even exist. With Liam, my dad began doing things he never done with me. They would occasionally camp, go fishing, and attend football games, things I was never even asked to do. I recall wondering why I was never included when I occasionally sat in my room and listened to them in the living room. I felt as though I was not a member of the family. Here's the problem, though. My father didn't simply ignore me. He constantly made active comparisons between Liam and me. How come you can't be more like Liam? That's not what Liam would do. Take a look at Liam's self-control. I never even agreed to this imaginary norm, yet it seemed like I was always falling short of it. Liam excelled at athletics. Fantastic. I don't have to be, though. But I was not permitted to be my own person in my father's eyes. I was meant to be with Liam if he was the gregarious, athletic one. The worst aspect, too? I made an effort. Yes, I did. My dad may finally notice me or treat me like I cared if I attempted to be more like Liam, I reasoned. Despite my lack of interest in athletics, I joined the basketball team. I reasoned that perhaps I could succeed if Liam could. But it was never enough, no matter what I did. Liam was better than me. I wasn't as powerful, quick, or self-assured. I once had a nice game, made a few good plays, and scored a few points. I felt fairly good about myself when I got home. I was hoping my dad would say something this time. However, he was already discussing his game with Liam when I entered the room, as if mine hadn't even occurred. He just remarked, "That's nice," when I tried to explain what I had done, and immediately returned to his talk with Liam. It was also more than simply sports. My dad would behave as like he had cured cancer if Liam had a B on an exam. He wouldn't even recognize that I was working so hard to achieve straight A's in the meanwhile. You know, I tried, but I'm not claiming I was flawless or anything. Despite my best efforts to make him proud, I was never able to catch up to Liam. Then there was school. Despite attending the same school, we received somewhat different treatment from others. It was Liam. Everyone admired him. Teachers are among them. He was the one who made me stand out when he entered a room. I was just the quiet, strange sibling of Liam, the child who has the books. My dad's frequent public acclaim of Liam as if he were a miraculous child didn't help either. I felt as though I couldn't get away from it at school or at home. People wanted to be around Liam everywhere I went, and I was just there. One day during a parent-teacher meeting in high school, my dad was informed by my English instructor that I had produced one of the greatest essays she had ever seen. If I persevered, she added, I might become a great writer since I had genuine ability. I had a tiny glimmer of optimism that perhaps this would be the moment when my father would be proud. But no. My father hardly raised his head from his phone. When the teacher attempted to clarify that not everything was about sports, he shrugged and asked if it would help me earn a scholarship for athletics. I could feel the shame searing in my face. It seems that unless my achievements were of the same caliber as Liam's, he didn't even notice them. For years, it was that way. Regardless all my efforts, Liam was always the one. My dad wouldn't mind if I worked on a project for weeks. My dad would pretend it was a masterpiece whenever Liam drew something on paper. Living in continual comparison to someone who wasn't even making an effort was like living in a shadow. The problem is, I don't even hold Liam responsible for the most of it. He was only being himself. He wasn't trying to make me feel guilty, and he didn't beg my dad to treat him like a king. He was simply going about his day and doing what he did. However, that didn't lessen the pain. I wondered why I wasn't good enough throughout a large portion of my youth and adolescence. I was wondering what I needed to do to get my dad to notice me at last. The way his eyes met Liam's. He treated me as though I weren't even a human. Just a continual reminder of my mother's treachery. Perhaps that is the crux of the matter. Every time my dad looked at me, I believe he saw me as her. He failed to notice me. He caught sight of the woman who had abandoned him, the silently departing woman. And he chose to vent his pain on me rather than deal with it. He was angry with me because he couldn't be angry with her. He was unable to inform her. His life was wrecked by her. I wasn't good enough, he informed me. Liam, too. Liam was the ideal diversion from everything. My dad needed an escape from the truth of our circumstances, and he provided it. Now, as I look back, I see it. But I didn't at the time. I simply believed that I was inadequate. I tried to be someone for years. I wasn't attempting to emulate Liam because I believed it may win my father's affection. I reasoned that perhaps things would change if I could only get better, wiser, and stronger. However, they didn't. However, the fact that I never gave up trying is what I remember the most. I kept hoping that everything will make sense eventually, that my father would eventually accept me for who I am, not simply the child who resembled his former partner. However, that day never materialized. I wish I could claim that things improved, but they didn't. No, not for a while. I did what any child in my circumstances would likely do after years of feeling like I would never measure up to Liam's standards. I gave up. After realizing that no matter how many times I attempted to impress my dad, nothing would ever change, I gave up attempting to get his favor. The story was the same every time. I was only there, and Liam was the favorite. I essentially coasted through my adolescence. I avoided difficulty, maintained good grades, and made every effort to blend in as much as possible. However, it was difficult to avoid the incessant comparisons entirely. It felt like a kick to the belly each time I heard my dad boasting to someone about Liam, and I believed that everything was over when I eventually moved out. I'm done with my dad. Liam is finished. I've had enough of feeling unimportant. But that was short-lived. You see, Liam and my dad grew closer after I left. It seemed like I wasn't there, to remind me of my mother. My dad could devote all of his attention to his genuine kid. They began to spend even more time together, engaging in activities that I was not really interested in learning about. I've heard that they launched a company together at one time. At first, I didn't give it much thought since, to be honest, I was still figuring out my own life. I suppose it began as a little local endeavor that wasn't intended to grow into something significant. Based on my little knowledge, it appeared like Liam came up with the concept, and my dad immediately stepped in since, well, Liam couldn't go wrong. I don't know the actual nature of the business, but given Liam, it was most likely something ostentatious, perhaps a side project, or business that seemed much more spectacular than it actually was. I just knew that my dad was spending his remaining resources to pay for it entirely. Even though I was no longer a part of their world, I could still hear tidbits of information from those who knew them. I occasionally heard how great the company was doing and how Liam was making significant progress, and each time I had that same old hurt, the sensation that I was still only watching Liam have the life I would never have. Then, however, things began to shift. At first, I was unaware of the whole scenario, but something seemed strange. There was less talk about Liam and the company. I was beginning to lose the reports I had been receiving about their incredible achievement. It seemed as though there was less and less discussion about the buzz that surrounded them. However, I didn't give it much thought because I was preoccupied with other things. Furthermore, I wasn't very eager to get back in touch with Liam and my dad. Then I received a call one day. I nearly didn't answer because the number wasn't stored on my phone. However, I felt compelled to respond, and when I did, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in much time. My stomach fell as I heard my dad's voice. I knew immediately that something was up because I hadn't spoken to him in what seemed like an eternity. He sounded different from the self-assured, almost cocky man I recalled. His voice was one of defeat. At first, I wasn't even sure what to say. He asked how I was doing in an attempt to strike up a conversation, but it seemed uncomfortable, as if we were complete strangers with nothing in common, which at the time, to be honest, was very much the case. Then he made his point. He informed me that the firm was struggling. Very terrible. It seems that Liam had just grabbed all of the funds and fled, lost. Everything my father had worked for and invested, everything was gone. After taking it, Liam vanished. I was unsure of how to respond. While I was somewhat stunned, I wasn't entirely taken aback. Charming others had always been Liam's forte. I suppose my dad had to learn the lesson the hard way. But it was my dad's request for my assistance that really got to me. After years of treating me as like I didn't exist and that Liam was better than me. He was extending his hand now. I was meant to intervene and save him now that everything had collapsed. It seemed unbelievable to me. After years of neglecting me and giving preference to Liam, my dad suddenly wanted me to make things right. He informed me that everything was coming apart, that he was in debt, and that he was at a loss for what to do. He sounded as though he had no other options. However, my only thought the entire time was, where was this when I needed him? He fell silent when I questioned him about why he wasn't approaching Liam for assistance. He muttered something regarding Liam's disappearance, of his ignorance about Liam's whereabouts. After giving this firm his all, my dad now had nothing to show for his efforts. I suppose he at last understood what it was like to be abandoned. However, what's the deal? I had no sympathy for him. Perhaps I ought to have, but I didn't. Because that's precisely how he made me feel for years, as if I were unimportant, as if I were an afterthought. And now that his golden kid, Liam, had abandoned him, he was turning to me. I didn't miss the irony. I didn't immediately respond to him. Though I secretly knew what I was going to do, I told him I needed time to consider. Following the phone call. For a long time, I just sat there contemplating everything. I tried to make my father proud for all those years. I always strived to be sufficient. And now, he needed me now. It sounded like a perverse joke, but I had changed as a child, and I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. Now I had to live my own life, and I was determined to do things my way this time. I thus had a lot on my mind following that phone conversation. It was crazy enough that my dad had sought to me for assistance. He needed me suddenly after years of treating me like a supporting character, and my anger increased as I gave it more attention. Where was he, after all, when I needed assistance? After dropping out of college, I was struggling to figure out what the heck I was going to do with my life and working late hours to make ends meet. As I was unable to pay for it. He was indifferent. Next, he never made contact, never inquired about my well-being. And now I was suddenly significant since Liam had bailed and his golden boy was not there to save him. I was not at all comfortable with that. I became more and more aware of something as I mentally reenacted the exchange. I had the upper hand for the first time in my life. I was the one pleading for his attention and approval for years. And now it was the other way around. Here's the problem, though. I no longer want his approval. It wasn't necessary for me. I had been attempting to prove myself to him for years. However, it seemed like everything clicked for me following that phone conversation. There was nothing I owed him. I had nothing to do with cleaning up the mess he and Liam had made. I made my decisions, and he made his. And I made the decision to not back down. My phone was inundated with his texts over the course of the following several days. He first made an effort to guilt me by saying things like, "You're my only hope, and I don't know what I'm going to do." Really, it was pitiful. Once, when I was having trouble with something, this man advised me to man up. Now that Liam had let him down, he was acting like a lost puppy. At first, I didn't answer. Before I spoke, I wanted to go through my own ideas. A part of me felt awful, but another part of me wanted to just cut him off entirely. He was still my father, after all. And even though he had made a mistake, I didn't care enough to provide him financial support, but enough to think about speaking with him. However, every time I considered answering the phone, I recalled all the occasions when I had needed him and he had failed to show up. I used to look at him when I was younger and wonder why he didn't care, why he didn't bother to inquire about my needs or how I was doing. He was now requesting my assistance. I simply didn't feel comfortable with it. One particular recollection kept coming to mind. It was from high school, immediately following my first full-time work. I was stacking shelves and bagging goods as part of my half-time job at a nearby grocery shop. Since it was my job, I was proud of it, even if it wasn't anything exceptional. Even though it wasn't much, I was making my own money. I was thrilled to tell my dad about it when I got home that first day. I hoped that today would be one of the few times that he would truly be pleased with me. Naturally, though, all he replied when I informed him was, "That's nice." This season, is Liam still playing football? It seemed like Liam was the center of attention no matter what I did. Even the slightest victories I had had to be eclipsed by whatever Liam was doing. I couldn't get that recollection out of my head throughout the days after the phone call. He was only reaching out because he had no one else, which served as a continual reminder that I had always been in second in his life. Not because he was interested in me. He needed something from me, and I wasn't going to fall for it, not because he wanted to mend our relationship. I finally made the decision to reply. I didn't want to give in to his demands, but I also didn't want to leave him hanging indefinitely. I wrote him back after taking a big breath, saying something like, "I'm sorry you're going through this, but I can't help you financially. I can't risk the hard work I've put in to get here. I'm hoping you figure something out." It was brief, straightforward, and direct. I didn't have to give him a detailed explanation. I didn't want to go into a lengthy discussion regarding his treatment of me throughout the years. Nothing was going to change because of it. I simply had to make it plain that I wasn't there to protect him. I had a strange range of feelings after sending the mail. I felt bad on the one hand. He was still my father after all, and I felt compelled to assist. However, for the first time in my life, I felt relieved. I had refused him. I wasn't going to back down from the boundaries I had established. To be honest, I was relieved when he took some time to respond. I believe I needed time to take it all in. However, I was also aware that he wasn't the kind to take things lightly. He did really call again a few days later. I left it on voicemail this time. I wasn't prepared to speak with him just yet. The voicemail was more of the same when I listened to it later. He expressed regret once again and stated he wished things had gone differently, but he truly needed my assistance. He even expressed sorrow for some of his previous actions. However, his delivery didn't seem sincere. I didn't fall for it. It seemed like he was just saying anything he thought would convince me to give him money. The problem is that while I lived under his roof, I was a different person. I would have seized the opportunity to assist back then, hoping that it would ultimately win his affection and make him proud. Now, however, I knew better now. I no longer required his approval. He didn't need my help. To believe that I was valuable. Without his assistance, I had established my own life, and I wasn't going to give up all I had fought so hard to achieve because Liam had stolen his money. At last, I was in charge of my own life, but I knew that this was not the end. I suspected there was more to come since my dad wasn't the kind to give up quickly. There was silence for a while. It felt strange at first, as if a burden had been removed from my shoulders, but there was also a void where all of the tension had been. I suppose I thought he would continue to push, to keep blowing up my phone, or to send guilt-tripping texts, but he didn't. Weeks passed, then days, and nothing happened. I felt a sense of relief. I reasoned that perhaps he was now understanding. Perhaps he is now realizing that I will not save him. However, I also felt strange about it, like if I wasn't accustomed to his not being in my thoughts. I had been trying to prove myself and attract his attention for a long time, but suddenly I didn't have to. It was odd. But life continued. I continued to attend night classes and work at my job, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was actually making progress. My pals also took note. "You've been in a better mood recently, or you seem more at ease lately," they might comment. They were correct. After years of bearing this burden, I felt as though I could finally breathe after establishing limits with my father. Of course, the silence wasn't maintained indefinitely. After several weeks, my phone rang. When I saw the number appear, it was my father once more. I paused this time. I nearly left it on voicemail as I had done previously, but I felt compelled to answer. Perhaps I just needed closure, or perhaps I was curious. So I replied. This time he sounded different. More exhausted, less desperate. It was surprising that he did not immediately beg for money again. Rather, he began to talk about the past, how he felt bad about not being there for me, and how he realized he hadn't been the best father. He had apologized before, but this time it seemed a bit different. He seemed to genuinely mean it. However, I couldn't get rid of the impression that he was only saying it because his life had taken a turn for the worst. He gave me further details about Liam's situation, including how he stole everything, not only the funds, but the company they founded together as well. Liam had apparently been preparing it for some time. Sometimes taking money out of the account, doing things behind my father's back. It was already too late when my dad noticed what was going on. All the money was gone, along with Liam. I couldn't help but think of all the times my dad had picked Liam above me as he was telling me all of this. He had always backed Liam, complimented him, and totally disregarded whatever I had done. And now he was left with nothing as a result of the person he had long held in high regard. I wanted to feel sorry for him, but I was unable to do so. He had to lie in his bed, which he had prepared. I listened to his words, but I didn't feel sorry for him. I believe he realized that because he eventually stopped mentioning Liam and simply stated, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I only wanted to inform you of the situation." That concluded everything. He didn't try to coerce me into doing anything or beg for money. He seemed to be aware that this was the last person in line. It seemed as though he had finally come to the realization that I wouldn't intervene and save him from his own errors. I sat there thinking about everything for a long time after we hung up. It was strange. I'd waited for him to acknowledge his mistakes and offer an apology for years, and now that he had, I wasn't sure how to react. I was hoping for some sort of closure, but all I got was a sense of emptiness, as if nothing had changed at all. Even yet, he had treated me like a second-class citizen for the most of my existence. Even yet, he had consistently picked Liam over me, and now he wanted to make up just because things had gone wrong for him. That was not how it worked. The problem was that my anger had subsided. I was no longer clinging to the hurt or the animosity as I formerly had. All of it was behind me now, but I wasn't going to forget it either. You cannot simply apologize and hope that everything will return to normal, particularly when normal was never decent in the first place. I decided as a result. I was not going to let him back in, but I also wasn't willing to cut him off entirely. If he reached out, I would be courteous and retain my distance, but that would be all. No more attempting to gain his favor. Stop attempting to address unfixable problems. In the weeks after that phone conversation, I continued on. I concentrated on my friends, my work, and my classes. I began to see that I was no longer in need of my father's approval. I had established my own life, a life of which I was proud, and I continued without anyone's agreement. I gave a lot of consideration to what may have been and how things might have turned out differently if my father had supported me throughout my formative years. Perhaps I wouldn't have needed to put in as much effort to establish myself. Perhaps I wouldn't have had to face so many challenges alone. However, the more I considered it, the more I understood that those hardships had shaped who I am now. Yes, it was terrible that my dad wasn't there for me when I needed him. However, I developed self-care skills. I discovered how to persevere in the face of adversity and how to never give up. And as a result, I was stronger now. I suppose I owe him something then, for making me into the person I am now, not for being a wonderful father. I didn't need him to finish my life since I constructed it without him. I just learned that Liam, who was essentially regarded like my dad's kid, had been imprisoned. Honestly, I wasn't all that shocked. It seems that his plots would eventually catch up with him after everything he had done with my dad. As it happens, he attempted to con someone who wasn't as understanding as my dad. After stealing all the money from their company, Liam apparently believed he could start a new business with the money he had stolen, but things didn't work out that way. I've heard that he attempted to defraud another man of a substantial sum of money, but he was caught this time. After realizing what was happening, the man filed accusations. Liam found himself in handcuffs and in a precarious legal scenario before he even realized it. To be honest, I didn't feel sorry for him when I initially heard the news. This was the same person who walked all over, after all. Without a second thought, my dad gathered what he could and disappeared. Karma had now at last caught up with him. Really, it's sort of ironic. My father had always admired Liam, treating him as though he were the ideal son, while I was the one who was overlooked. While I was out here creating my life, Liam was languishing in a prison cell. Slowly, I'm not sure what will happen with Liam next, but to be honest, I don't care. He is currently coping with the repercussions of his decisions. In the meanwhile, I'm making progress, getting rid of all that. Sometimes the way things work out is strange. You quote V spent your entire life believing that someone has everything all out, only to see them fail. Ultimately. However, it is no longer my story. Liam follows his own way. Finally, Mai is my own too.